Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Tom Temin, Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. The federal government does a lot of science, but Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono thinks federal scientists across the government are taken for granted, or worse, unappreciated and even disrespected. She's published a letter to that effect at Federal News Network, but I thought you might want to hear from her directly. Senator Hirono joins me now. Senator, good to have you on.
It's good to be on. Aloha, everyone.
So tell us what prompted you to write this letter saying that you want to back up the federal scientists.
It's come to light in a number of instances that this is not an administration that is relying on their scientists within the federal government for decision making. And frankly, it came to light for me when Secretary Zinke came to testify, and I was asking him questions about whether or not they allow use of the words climate change in their reports, and he said, we would never edit any reports to that effect, but it came to light just, I think, a month later that was in fact happening. So I began to pay attention to other examples where the scientists were being interfered with, or their works were delayed in publication, or in the case of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, whole sections of the USDA were being moved to places outside of Washington, D.C., and the President's Chief of Staff, Mulvaney, saying something along the lines of, this is a good way to cut down on government employees. So there's a pattern. And this pattern has resulted in me and others requesting the Inspector General of departments to conduct an investigation as to why some of these things are happening. And there are 3 ongoing investigations, even as we speak, on the basis of the letters that we have sent.
These are OIG investigations, and which agencies are they occurring at?
Well, one is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's, remember the Sharpie Gate, where their weather map, which is a science-based map, was changed to indicate that the state of Alabama was going to be hit with a weather event. So there's an investigation going on as to how Sharpie Gate occurred. And then there's an investigation going on with the U.S. Department of Agriculture bearing climate change-related research and movement of both as I mentioned, some departments of both the Economic Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture to Kansas City, Missouri. And then there's another one where then Deputy Secretary Bernhardt's interference with the release of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service report on the impacts of pesticides on endangered species. And, of course, Deputy Secretary Bernhardt is now the Secretary of the department.
Got it. And you also mentioned in your letter that the EPA, as you say, is under constant attack. Tell us what you see there.
The EPA does a lot of really important studies, including things such as, what happens to children if they are exposed to environmental hazards like pesticides and lead. So there is an Office of Children's Health Protection within the EPA, and there is an effort to pretty much, I would say, shut it down. I mean, they put the head of that office summarily on leave as she was pushing for a study on the impact of pesticides on children. So there are things that go on like that throughout a lot of the departments, and a lot of this is going on under the radar screen. And the scientists who are working in our federal government, I think they know what's going on, and that's why this letter is really important to tell them that their work is valued. Their work is important to inform our decision-making, even if we have an administration that is much more interested in hearing from the corporations, hearing from the fossil fuel industry as to what we should do. But there are those of us who think otherwise, that we want to get independent, science-based information and research and studies on which to rely on for our decision-making.
We're speaking with Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono, a Democratic senator, and Hawaii itself is something of a environmental crucible for a lot of reasons. Do you get feedback from your constituents with respect to what's going on?
I get letters from people who are very interested in what's going on with the EPA and what's going on with protecting endangered species. Hawaii is the endangered species capital of the country. if not the world. We have a lot of endangered species in Hawaii. We also have invasive species that come into our isolated island chain where they can wreak havoc on our flora and fauna. So we're very interested in what the USDA, that's the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the Maine, to make sure that they continue to conduct studies on invasive species impact on things like our coffee crop. Hawaii is the only state that grows coffee, by the way.
Yes, I know. I
But
like
we like
the
all
coffee.
of this information. Kona coffee and other coffees. I shouldn't just shout out for Kona coffee, but there's other coffee produced in Hawaii. But we have invasive species that attack the coffee berries. We want science-based, research to enable us to fight back.
Now, there have been back and forth with administrations on EPA. There were rules that were promulgated during the Obama administration that even the courts said were beyond the statutory authority of the EPA. Could that be one of the issues at work here?
Mainly, we have an administration that thinks that government regulations is something that is they're trying to cut back on as many government regulations as possible. And why? I mean, who does government regulate? Polluters, people who put dangerous chemicals into the air. Those are the kinds of health and safety regulations that the government pays attention to and promulgates. But this administration wants to eliminate as many regulations as possible. And in fact, I think they've said it. That's one of their goals. They like government to be what they would call less intrusive. But I would call it government's mission is to protect the health and safety of our people.
Well, do you contemplate any legislation that might counteract some of the effects that you've written about that in the letter and that you've discussed?
There are a number of bills that a number of people have introduced, including myself. But as long as Mr. McConnell is holding the reins of what gets put on the Senate floor for voting, we're not going to see much along those lines. And
while we have you, let me ask you about another thing that you would require both houses to get together on, and that is appropriations so that there is not a government shutdown. I think the latest continuing resolution takes us till about Christmas.
Well, it actually takes us to November 21st.
Yeah,
right
so
now.
Thanksgiving.
So we obviously are either going to have to come up with all of the appropriations or we're going to need to do another continuing resolution. So the discussion, I think, is around taking us almost to Christmas or somewhere in that time frame. I think there is a commitment not to shut government down again. I hope that Mitch McConnell will stick to that because the last government shutdown was devastating to hundreds of thousands of particularly federal employees, but also people who contract with the federal government. So a 1-month government shutdown where people didn't have their salaries for 2 weeks was really difficult. And I met with a lot of federal employees in Hawaii who were resorting to going to the food bank, et cetera. And this happened all across the country. So this is not something that we want to see happen, a government shutdown. I think that in a bipartisan way we'll do everything to make sure that doesn't happen. But who knows what the president has in mind, because he's not getting his wall.
Yes, well, there's a lot of issues swirling around there. Do you ever think if everyone took, say, a shot of Jameson's and dropped that into their Kona, that we could just maybe all get along better?
Well, that might help. Or they can just come to Hawaii where, people tend to get along, where people tend to respect other people's cultures. Yes. No place is perfect, but I'd say Hawaii is a place where we respect, as I said, other cultures, and we understand that our country is really, aside from the original peoples who were here, made up of waves of immigrants.
All right, I'll have to get back there. It's been quite a number of years. Senator Mazie Hirono is a Democrat representing Hawaii. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. I hope we can do it again. Aloha to everyone listening.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive, where you can also view Senator Hirono's open letter, hear the Federal Drive on demand, subscribe at Apple Podcasts or Podcast One.